God did not see 7 equal days when he looked at the expanse of this week, because he saw this specific Wednesday entirely differently from all the rest, recognizing it as the ultimate crossroads. Day where the profound weight of everything that is behind you and the boundless potential of everything that is ahead of you are held in an exact, exquisite balance until something monumental finally tips the scale in your favor. And the truth that you need to anchor into your spirit right now is that God has already tipped that scale toward you, long before you even opened your eyes this morning, sealing something powerful and irrevocable in your name that is not just some vague, distant promise still pending your perfect performance, but a final, documented, already decided verdict of victory. In the last 48 hours, you made a quiet, profound choice that most of the people moving rapidly around you never even noticed, a moment that may have looked incredibly small from outside, perhaps just 5 seconds of quiet courage in the face of overwhelming doubt, or perhaps a whispered prayer you genuinely believed went unanswered in the silence of your room, or perhaps something you finally released from your grip that you had been fiercely holding onto long past its designated season. You must understand that most human moments go entirely unrecorded by the world, slipping through the cracks of history without a second thought. But that specific moment of your surrender and faith did not go unrecorded, because the God who witnesses absolutely everything saw it with crystal clarity, and decided in that very instant that this exact Wednesday would be the definitive day your life story entered an entirely new chapter. He has been actively building a miraculous door right in the middle of your hardest, most grueling seasons, a door with your name already beautifully carved into its frame, constructed mysteriously and perfectly from the very pieces of your life that you mistakenly thought were only breaking you down and destroying your spirit. Chosen ones are never advanced by the cold, calculating performance systems of this world, nor are they elevated because they simply checked all the right boxes or pleased the right crowds. Rather, they are recognized and promoted by a loving Father who carefully watches someone hold on with everything they have, when holding on seems completely unreasonable and illogical to everyone else watching. He watched your struggle, he was deeply moved by your unyielding faith, and today he is officially opening the door he painstakingly built just for you, guaranteeing that by the time you finish receiving this message, you will know exactly who you are becoming starting this very Wednesday. Starting right now in this exact breath. You have walked through valleys where the shadows felt permanent, where the echoes of your own footsteps were the only replies to your desperate pleas for direction. Yet in all of that, a divine architecture was being laid down beneath your feet, step by step, tier by tier, transforming your exhaustion into the exact foundation required for this massive breakthrough. The reality of your journey is that it was never about punishing you or abandoning you to the wilderness. It was always about preparing you for a moment of elevation so significant that it required a thoroughly tested and completely purified vessel to carry the weight of the blessing that is now being released into your life. Every seemingly unanswered prayer was actually a deposit into an account of grace that is now reaching its maturation date, ready to be poured out over your life in a tidal wave of favor, clarity, and purpose that will wash away the residual sting of every tear you shed in secret. This Wednesday is not merely another rotation of the earth or another square on the calendar. It is a divine appointment, a designated threshold meticulously planned from the foundation of the world, designed specifically to launch you out of the cycles of repetition and into the brilliant, expansive reality of your true calling and ultimate destiny. Picture this profound moment with me, somewhere on a seemingly normal Wednesday morning, in a season that has ruthlessly asked everything of a person and seemingly returned what felt like very little. Someone wakes up and begins to move through the ordinary, mundane motions of the day with coffee in hand, light streaming gently through a familiar window, surrounded by the comforting, predictable sounds of a morning that looks exactly like every other morning that came before it. On the outside, to the casual observer, it is just a normal Wednesday, but underneath that calm surface, something massive and unstoppable is pressing forward in your spirit, manifesting as a deep knowing without a specific name, a powerful readiness with no visible destination yet, and a quiet, unshakable certainty that something incredibly real and deeply transformative is about to change in your atmosphere. That person experiencing this profound internal shift is you, and you absolutely did not arrive at this specific intersection of time and space by accident, because the same sovereign God, who carefully arranged the stars and mapped out your entire life journey, perfectly arranged this very morning too, ensuring that the details of how you came to be here, in this specific window of time, receiving these precise words, were not assembled by random chance or chaotic luck. They were assembled by meticulous, loving care by the exact same supreme intelligence that has been shaping and forming you through every painful season you did not ask for, and through every agonizing silence you did not choose, using those very instruments of discomfort to carve out a greater capacity for joy and power within your soul. That infinite intelligence has intentionally brought you to this Wednesday threshold, and it has brought you here specifically because you are finally ready, not ready in the superficial, fleeting way the world defines readiness based on external credentials or bank accounts, but ready in the profound, enduring way chosen ones are always ready, which means having your faith intact despite fire, having your spirit entirely willing despite the fatigue, and having your inner ear finally tuned to the divine frequency of what is truly being said. There are intricate, deeply spiritual things that only someone who carries the heavy, often lonely weight of a chosen one would ever truly understand, things you may have entirely stopped trying to put into words to explain to your friends or family, because the words themselves never quite reach the staggering reality of what you have been living and surviving every single day. You know intimately what it is to be thoroughly prepared for something grand that you cannot fully see yet, to carry a burning sense of purpose in one hand and a seemingly endless season of waiting in the other, constantly bearing the immense tension between them without knowing when that agonizing tension will ever resolve into the promised breakthrough. You know exactly what it is to pray with absolute, full-hearted faith and wake up to what feels like a wall of deafening silence, to force yourself to move forward in blind obedience and find path ahead still shrouded in thick fog, and to consistently give your absolute best in a season or environment that does not seem to recognize, value, or appreciate the rare light you are bringing to the table. You know the haunting sensation of what it is to stand in a room completely full of people and feel a kind of deep, aching aloneness that has absolutely nothing to do with how many physical bodies are present, but rather the unique aloneness of someone who inherently sees the world differently, feels every emotion more deeply, and carries a spiritual weight that others around them simply do not perceive or understand. You have watched people comfortably settle for lives that are easy, predictable, and entirely insufficient for the magnificent things you know deep in your bones you were inherently made for. And you have felt the strange, isolating grief of not being able to simply settle down and blend in with them, not because you arrogantly believe you are above anyone else, but because your soul simply cannot betray what you know is your true God-given reality. That grief, that heavy weight, that constant restlessness inside your chest was never evidence of God's absence. It was the intense heat of God's workshop, forging a spirit within you that is unbreakable, unshakable, and completely ready to step into a Wednesday that will redefine the entire trajectory of your life from this moment forward. Every single season that stretched painfully beyond whatever seemed fair, every desperate prayer that seemingly landed in an abyss of silence, and every hopeful door that slammed closed before you could fully understand where you were even trying to go, none of that was a punishment designed to break you, none of it was a cruel abandonment, and absolutely none of it was evidence that you had somehow misread your calling or misunderstood your inherent worth. Instead, it was an intense, necessary period of divine formation, much like how Moses spent 40 grueling, anonymous years in the desolate wilderness before he ever experienced a single morning, standing triumphantly at the border of the Promised Land, enduring 4 decades of rigorous behind the scenes preparation for a miraculous crossing that ultimately took only 1 single day to accomplish. The longest, most challenging part of his incredible story was never the spectacular miracle of the parting waters. It was the quiet, invisible making of the man himself in the shadows, where people observing Moses from the outside only saw a man who had once proudly walked in the opulent corridors of supreme power, now reduced to tending stubborn sheep in a harsh, unforgiving desert that nobody celebrated or cared about. What those onlookers could not possibly see or comprehend was that God was systematically dismantling every single false identity built on borrowed authority and worldly prestige, carefully stripping away the superficial layers so that something infinitely more durable, authentic, and divinely mandated could eventually take its rightful place in His Spirit. What the world confidently dismissed as total irrelevance, God intentionally called vital preparation, and what society impatiently labeled as a tragic delay, God purposefully called divine design. Because the barren wilderness is never meant to be your final destination. It is simply the mandatory doorway you must walk through to shed the things that cannot survive where you are going. And the beautiful truth about that wilderness doorway is that it always, without fail, ends at a brand new morning, sometimes arriving on an ordinary Tuesday, sometimes breaking through on a random Thursday, but sometimes it arrives on a highly anticipated Wednesday when the undeniable voice of God finally breaks through the noise and says, "Rise up, cross over this boundary and confidently enter the incredible thing I have been faithfully holding in reserve just for you." This specific Wednesday is exactly that morning for you, the morning where the waiting officially expires and the manifestation begins. And there are unmistakable signs that appear in the life of a chosen one in the crucial season just before the crossing, signs you do not even need to wonder if they belong to you because once they are named, your spirit will instantly and undeniably recognize them as the story of your own life. The very first sign of this imminent crossing is a profound, unshakable restlessness that absolutely no worldly adjustment can resolve. A persistent stirring that you have desperately tried to address by adopting new habits, seeking out new environments, meeting new people, and drafting entirely new plans for your life. Yet, despite all of those frantic external changes, the deep restlessness remains firmly planted in your chest, not because something is fundamentally wrong with you or because you are failing, but ironically because something is incredibly right, as something deep in your spiritual DNA inherently knows that a massive change is not only coming, it is drastically overdue and pushing at the very seams of your current reality. This unique restlessness is not mere anxiety or worry. It is the high-frequency vibration of extreme readiness, actively looking for its appointed moment to launch, and it will absolutely only be satisfied by a genuine, God-ordained beginning, which is precisely what the atmosphere of this specific Wednesday carries in its wings. When you feel this divine agitation, you must recognize it as the final labor pains before the birth of your new season, an undeniable indicator that your inner capacity has finally outgrown the restrictive borders of your current circumstances and is demanding to be released into the wide open spaces of the promises you have been fiercely holding on to in the dark. The second crucial sign that you are standing at the threshold of a totally new era is a noticeable, sometimes painful shifting in your personal relationships, where people who once felt absolutely central and vital to your daily existence are suddenly beginning to feel peripheral, distant, and strangely out of sync with where your mind and heart are currently operating. Connections, friendships, and associations that once genuinely gave you life, inspiration, and comfort are now beginning to quietly drain your energy, leaving you feeling depleted, misunderstood, and entirely out of place in rooms where you used to feel completely at home and celebrated. You must understand deep in your heart that this relational shifting is not an act of betrayal, nor is it a sign that you are becoming bitter or prideful. It is simply the painful but necessary process of divine alignment, because the same God who is meticulously preparing you for something entirely new is also simultaneously preparing the landscape around you to support that newness. Not everyone who was assigned to the previous, difficult chapter of your life is meant to be present in the vibrant, elevated next chapter, and the gradual releasing of what is naturally passing away is not a tragedy or a true loss. It is the deliberate, strategic creation of necessary space for the incredible people and opportunities that are already on their way to you. The third unmistakable sign of this impending crossing is the development of a highly tuned, heightened sensitivity to what is genuinely real and what is entirely fake. As chosen ones in the season, just before their break, through develop an almost complete and total intolerance for pretense, superficiality, and empty performances. Things, conversations, and entertainments that once easily held your attention no longer do, as surface-level chats, exhausting performances of worldly achievement, and the chaotic noise of lives lived without any real intention or depth, now feel incredibly grating and suffocating to your newly awakened spirit. You are not actively judging the people who still enjoy these things. You simply find that you literally cannot remain inside those frequencies anymore without feeling a deep, suffocating compromise in your soul, and this is simply the powerful gift of divine discernment activating within you at full strength. Your spirit, having been sharpened and refined by the harsh realities of the wilderness, is now rapidly sorting through absolutely everything in your environment with laser precision, instantly identifying what truly belongs in the glorious new chapter you are stepping into and decisively discarding what no longer fits your elevated purpose. The fourth sign is your sudden, inexplicable access to an unexpected, profound peace right in the absolute middle of chaotic circumstances that have no rational, logical basis for generating peace whatsoever, yet you find this deep calm arriving anyway, anchoring your mind when everything around you suggests you should be panicking. In the quiet, unseen moments of your day, something deeply reassuring settles into your bones that has absolutely no explanation in the visible, material world. And you must know that this calm is not you living in denial of your problems. It is the literal peace that surpasses all human understanding, making its first truly sustained appearance in your life. It is the exact peace that always arrives in the life of a chosen one when the heavenly verdict has already been officially sealed, when the grueling trial is finally over, and the glorious crossing into the new territory is absolutely imminent, serving as God's way of quietly saying to your spirit without using any words, "I have not forgotten you. I have been here the entire time, and what I decided to bless you with before you woke up this morning has already been set into unstoppable motion." The fifth and perhaps most beautifully simple yet overwhelmingly powerful sign that this is your moment is the sheer fact that you are here, listening to these exact words, right now on this specific Wednesday, drawn by an invisible current of grace to this exact intersection of time and truth. Something deep inside of your spirit already knew, long before you even arrived at this moment, that today was going to carry a spiritual weight and a profound significance that ordinary run-of-the-mill days simply do not carry, compelling you to pause and listen to a message that speaks directly to the hidden chapters of your soul. You came here carrying a quiet, undeniable readiness that you may not have even been able to properly name or explain to anyone else. But that readiness acted as a divine compass that perfectly brought you here, and I need you to know with absolute certainty that here is exactly where the Creator of the universe meant for you to be. If these undeniable signs are landing heavily in your spirit right now, resonating with the very core of your experiences, then you need to fully acknowledge that you are not just a passive listener today, but an active participant in a massive spiritual shift that is rewriting the code of your future. Now I want to speak directly about what was actually being built inside of you during those agonizing seasons that pressed the hardest against your faith, because the wilderness is not only a desolate place where superficial things are painfully stripped away. It is also the primary construction site where the most durable, powerful things are forged. It is the specific place where qualities are constructed that literally only grow in the harsh conditions of sustained, relentless difficulty met with equally sustained, unyielding faith, proving that the fire was not meant to burn you to ashes, but to forge you into an instrument of unimaginable strength. In your absolutely hardest season, when you felt like you were barely surviving day to day, you were actually building a rare, exceptional quality of endurance that is genuinely scarce in this world, not the superficial kind of endurance that simply grits its teeth and angrily waits for the storm to eventually pass, but the miraculous kind that actually deepens in faith, softens in love, and grows in power as the painful season extends. That specific character, the unique quality meticulously shaped by your stubborn refusal to quit when quitting made the most sense, is the exact, precise thing that perfectly positions a chosen one to properly handle the magnitude of the threshold moment that is arriving today. You simply do not cross the Jordan River and step into your promised land on borrowed momentum, temporary hype, or someone else's prayers. You cross it solely on the strong back of something profound that was built slowly, deliberately, and painfully over the years that felt the most like your ultimate delay and deepest failure. In your agonizing season of waiting in the dark, you were also simultaneously building a razor-sharp discernment, because there is something profoundly transformative about spending extended, unavoidable time in the quiet, when all of your human striving has been completely exhausted and every clever plan you made for yourself has totally run out of road. It is in that exact place of surrender that the inner ear is perfectly calibrated, where the divine voice that speaks the unalterable truth of who you really are becomes louder and clearer than the chaotic noise of the world's opinions, and the specific direction that belongs exclusively to your deepest design becomes brilliantly specific. And so you arrive at this beautiful Wednesday morning actively carrying a rare ability to truly hear, to intimately know, and to boldly follow a path that was entirely unavailable to you before. The crushing weight of the wilderness pressed your spiritual capacities wide open. In your painful season of loss, when you had to watch relationships unexpectedly end, when you were forced to release comfortable but outdated versions of yourself, and when you had to agonizingly surrender the cherished dreams you held in the exact form they first appeared, you were not actually being impoverished or punished. In all of that heartbreaking stripping away, you were being meticulously prepared, because the old, familiar containers of your life were simply not large enough, strong enough, or flexible enough to hold the immense weight of the glory and responsibility that is specifically designated for your next chapter. What painfully felt like a devastating loss was actually God mercifully clearing the overgrown ground of your life, deliberately turning the soil not because your life was barren, but because the massive seeds of what is being planted in you now require a profound depth that shallow, flat, untested ground simply cannot provide to sustain real growth. The people who naturally moved away from you in this transitional season, the comfortable connections that gradually thinned out, and the familiar relationships that suddenly shifted without warning, that painful movement is absolutely not evidence that you are becoming less valuable or less lovable. It is absolute, undeniable evidence that you are rapidly becoming more, because the promised land you are entering is inhabited entirely differently than the desolate wilderness you are leaving behind, and the God who is calling you forward is actively reorganizing the entire relational landscape of your existence to match your new altitude. He is doing this carefully so that the rooms you are about to walk into are heavily populated by incredible people who effortlessly match the elevated frequency of exactly who you are becoming, ensuring you will no longer have to shrink yourself down to make others comfortable in your presence. What the enemy maliciously tries to frame in your mind as cruel rejection and isolation, God triumphantly frames as necessary repositioning and divine protection, shielding you from the anchors that would have undoubtedly dragged you down, just as you were meant to finally take flight. And while all of this intense spiritual and emotional formation was actively underway in the invisible realms of your life, quietly shaping your endurance, your discernment, and expanding the space within your soul, something equally fascinating and directly related to your journey was simultaneously happening in the physical world, specifically in a neuroscience laboratory in New York City. A small, dedicated team of researchers, led brilliantly by a doctor who had spent 20 exhaustive years studying the intricate architecture and hidden potential of the human brain, made a staggering discovery that completely shifts how we understand human capability. A discovery that has unfortunately not received the massive global attention it truly deserves. It hasn't been ignored because the science is obscure or flawed, but rather because if this profound truth were widely understood and applied by the masses, you would no longer need to rely on many of the expensive, stressful things the modern, hyper-commercialized world endlessly profits from selling to you to fix problems you shouldn't even have. What these dedicated scientists discovered connects directly and undeniably to something you have already lived through, something beautiful about who you naturally were as a brilliant, unhindered child, and something tragic about what slowly, silently shifted and suppressed within your mind as you grew older and conformed to the world. I want you to hold on to this massive paradigm-shifting question. What if the primary reason your mind has not been operating at the absolute fullness it was originally designed for, the crystal clarity, the effortless creative insight, the profound ease of complex thought that was entirely natural to you when you were young, is not your fault at all? What if that incredible, genius-level capacity faded away not because of natural aging, and not because you lack discipline or intelligence, and absolutely not because of any inherent flaw in your divine design, but simply because something incredibly real and powerful was systematically taken from you by the environments you were forced into? Hold that revolutionary question in the forefront of your mind, because the staggering answer is a massive part of what makes this specific Wednesday not just another ordinary day, but a monumental beginning of total restoration for both your spirit and your physical mind. There is an incredibly powerful word in ancient Hebrew that absolutely deserves to be spoken out loud over your life on a definitive morning, exactly like this one, and that ancient word is rashid, a word so fundamental that it appears in the very first foundational sentence of all of Scripture, typically translated simply as "in the beginning." But that simple English translation barely scratches the surface and completely fails to carry the full, majestic weight of what the word actually means. Because rashid does not simply mean the chronological start of a basic sequence of events, it profoundly means the first fruits, the absolute best and most significant portion. It represents the specific piece that is holy, set apart, and actually carries within its DNA the exact quality, the unbreakable promise, and the guaranteed blueprint of absolutely everything beautiful and abundant that is going to follow it in the days to come. When an ancient farmer faithfully brought the rashid of his hard-earned harvest to the altar, he was not just bringing the first random handful of something ordinary. He was confidently bringing the ultimate, perfect representative piece of everything the rich soil had been divinely designed to produce, signifying a beginning that inherently contained the absolute fullness of the end. This profound concept is exactly what God has sovereignly written over this specific Wednesday for you. It is not just a hesitant start, but a true rashid, a glorious first fruits morning, where what begins today is absolutely not a fragile trial run or a temporary fix. It is the strong, undeniable representative of exactly what the rest of this entire new season is going to look like when it fully, magnificently unfolds in your life, bringing with it a wave of sustained blessing that will not dry up when the circumstances around you change. And beautifully complementing that Hebrew concept, the ancient Greek world had a magnificent word that belongs right alongside it to fully explain what is happening to you today. And that word is kairos, a concept of time that completely redefines how you should view the exact moment you are standing in right now. To truly understand the immense power of what kairos means, you first have to understand what it is not, which means looking at the other Greek word for time, chronos, which represents ordinary, ticking clock time, the regular, monotonous march of hours, days, and weeks that absolutely does not differentiate between this Wednesday and any other random day on the calendar. Chronos is the grueling time you spent waiting, bleeding, and wondering if anything would ever change. But Kairos is entirely different. Kairos is the divinely appointed time, the supreme moment set apart in the heavens before the Chronos clock of the universe ever even began moving. Kairos is the precise, perfect moment for which all of that agonizing Chronos time was merely preparation. The exact intersection where heaven invades earth and suddenly accelerates everything that has been delayed, making up for years of lost time in a single, breathless instance of divine favor. When the inspired writers of the New Testament desperately wanted to convey that God acts in highly specific moments with hyper-specific, unstoppable purpose, they intentionally used the word kairos, not chronos, ensuring we understand that God is not bound by the ticking clock, but is the master of the perfect opportunity. Your long, difficult wilderness season was absolutely chronos, necessary, painful, grinding time that ultimately served a refining purpose. But this spectacular Wednesday morning is pure kairos. This is the appointed, set-apart moment, the exact window of opportunity that was always secretly woven into the grand design of your life story. You were not painstakingly carried through all of that fire, all of that loss, and all of that preparation just to arrive at another completely ordinary, frustrating day. You were preserved specifically for this Kairos moment, a threshold where your faith aligns perfectly with God's timing to unleash a transformation that will leave you absolutely breathless. Here is something incredibly practical, potent, and immediately actionable for you to boldly carry with you through the rest of this monumental Wednesday, and firmly into the bright days that are destined to follow it. Because what you actively choose to speak out of your mouth on this specific day matters immensely. It matters not in some silly, superstitious way, but in the exact, powerful way that identity declarations have always worked in the life of someone who is consciously crossing over into a completely new chapter of their destiny, acting as the bridge between the unseen promise and the physical reality. These spoken declarations do not magically create the new reality out of thin air. Rather, they perfectly align your mind, your spirit, and your actions to the new reality that has already been created by God and is currently waiting for you to step into it and claim it as your own. When Moses finally stood at the edge of the rushing Jordan River, God didn't tell him to just think good thoughts. He gave him highly specific, authoritative words to boldly speak out loud before the miraculous crossing could be entirely completed. Words that were not wishful thinking or fake performance, but pure, powerful alignment. It was the spoken, fearless acknowledgement of what God had already decided in the heavenly realms, pulling that truth down into the earthly realm. And so here is exactly what I passionately want to give you to intentionally speak over yourself on this deeply significant Wednesday. You must declare, I am the living beginning that God specifically wrote for this day. I am not merely the exhausted person who barely survived the last brutal season, but I am the strong, resilient person that the painful season was actively building and refining in the dark. I completely refuse to be defined by what I lost, what was taken from me, or who walked away, because I am now perfectly positioned and uniquely empowered by exactly what was formed inside of me during that agonizing losing process. I am absolutely not waiting in the shadows anymore. I am actively walking forward in the light. I am not behind in life. I have not missed my window, and I am exactly, precisely where the sovereign God, who meticulously designs chosen ones, intended for me to be on this specific, appointed morning. You must purposefully speak those heavy, truth-filled words today, not just once as a lifeless recitation or a memorized poem, but as a fierce, unyielding declaration of truth that you actively choose to inhabit, because the brilliant, elevated version of you that this Wednesday exists to introduce is absolutely not the broken version that still constantly narrates the sad, old story of defeat. It is the victorious, restored version of you that has graciously received a brand new story. And the grand invitation of this Wednesday is to step completely forward with both feet, making one final, definitive decision that is absolutely not contingent on all the other unpredictable variables in your life perfectly aligning first. It is the bold, courageous decision to entirely agree with what God has already spoken about you, to fully receive the majestic identity He has been forming in the fire, rather than desperately holding onto the diminished, fearful identity that the harsh wilderness years tried to permanently write onto your spirit. Every single chosen one throughout history who has ever stood at a massive threshold faced this exact, terrifying, beautiful choice, and the definitive difference between those who successfully crossed over into their promise and those who tragically did not was never about their natural ability or inherent worthiness. It was always exclusively about their sheer willingness to confidently step into exactly what God had declared, even when the ground beneath their second foot had not yet hardened, trusting that the same God who called them out upon the waters would not let them sink when they finally took the step. If these profound signs and truths are landing deeply in your spirit, and if you arrived on this specific Wednesday carrying a heavy burden, you are finally ready to permanently put down before the sun sets today, then you must know there is a highly specific, supernatural blessing that accompanies a true Rashid morning. This is not just a generic, vague blessing. that generally applies to anyone who happens to be born in a good season. This is a laser, focused, specific blessing, uniquely tailored to the exact, grueling preparation you have undergone, perfectly calibrated to the deep formation that happened in the dark seasons you definitely did not choose for yourself. The very first dimension of what is being powerfully released into your life in this new season is an unprecedented level of clarity, the rare, pristine kind of clarity that only arrives when the harsh wilderness years have forcefully stripped away every single competing narrative, and the true, authentic direction for your life becomes unmistakably, brilliantly visible. You have been stuck in an exhausting season where dozens of loud, conflicting voices constantly competed for your fractured attention, and the overwhelming noise made it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to know with absolute certainty which way to move or what decision to make. But I am here to tell you that this suffocating noise is definitively ending today, and what is beginning right now is a beautiful season of unmistakable, crystal, clear direction, because the God who called you by name is highly specific, and on this vibrant side of the Rashid morning, his specific voice will carry further and resonate deeper within you than it has in a very long time. The second profound dimension being released is a radical upgrade in your connection. The relationships that are actively coming toward you, and some are coming very, very soon, are completely different in kind and quality from the ones that surrounded you in the wilderness, proving to be not just more pleasant, but generationally, fundamentally different. You are about to attract people who naturally carry a spiritual frequency that perfectly matches exactly who you are in this elevated new chapter. People who will effortlessly understand what you are building and why it matters without requiring exhausting, lengthy explanations or constant defense of your vision. These are incredible people who are also enduring their own intense preparation in the shadows and are now crossing over at a very similar threshold, ready to link arms with you and build something sustainable, beautiful, and deeply impactful that none of you could have possibly built alone in your previous seasons. The third staggering dimension is unprecedented provision. You are going to see massive doors suddenly swinging wide open in professional and creative spaces that were tightly, stubbornly sealed shut during your wilderness years, revealing opportunities arriving in miraculous forms that could not have been logically predicted, but are unmistakably right for your specific destiny. You will experience sudden financial clarity and breakthrough in areas that were historically foggy and stressful, accompanied by a specific, brilliant kind of insight, the sudden arrival of complex solutions, and the unexpected rush of genius ideas that rightfully belong to someone whose mind is finally operating at the exact level it was originally designed for. This is a mind no longer diminished, clouded, or exhausted by years of endless striving and survival mode, but rather a mind fully restored to the incredible, boundless capacity it naturally carried before the heavy, cynical world began systematically pressing it down and trying to force it into a mediocre, predictable mold. That crucial third dimension of provision and insight is exactly where I need to stay and expand for a moment, because the total restoration of the mind that is happening to you is not only a spiritual, ethereal concept, it is something highly specific, scientifically measurable, and profoundly physiological, linking the spirit and the body. And this is exactly where the groundbreaking discovery made by that brilliant doctor in New York fits perfectly into the puzzle of your life, serving as the physical mechanism for the spiritual breakthrough you are experiencing today, bridging the gap between heavenly promises and earthly application. Now I need to bring you the massive culmination of something that has been quietly building since the very first sentence of this message, something incredibly profound that lives exactly at the intersection of what was unfairly taken from you and what is miraculously available to you on this specific, appointed Wednesday morning. Because the total restoration that God is actively speaking over your life right now is not only spiritual in a broad general sense, there is a highly specific, tangible dimension of it that relates exactly to how your physical mind was intricately designed to function, and how that brilliant function has been severely suppressed by decades of living in a world that simply did not understand what it was doing to its brightest minds. What doctor, Daniel Barron and his dedicated team of researchers ultimately discovered was not just another exhausting self-help method or a complicated daily routine to add to your overloaded schedule. It was profound built-in mechanism, a dormant switch that already exists deep inside of your brain, one that was simply dimmed by the chaotic world before you were even old enough to understand how to protect it. It does not require massive willpower. It is not just another behavioral system you have to force yourself to adopt. It is a biological mechanism waiting to be turned back on, beautifully confirming what Dr. Roger Sperry originally proved back in 1981 when he won the Nobel Prize in Science for a staggering discovery that most people have tragically never been taught in any church or school. Dr. Sperry scientifically proved that the human brain inherently possesses two distinct hemispheres, the left and the right, and that when those two brilliant hemispheres are working together in absolute, full synchronization, something genuinely extraordinary and almost superhuman happens to the individual's cognitive capacity. The entire brain activates completely, not just partially or sporadically, but fully and harmoniously, exactly the way it effortlessly activated when you were a joyful child, a time when learning happened organically, creative thinking felt entirely natural, and brilliant solutions arrived in your mind as though the answer had always been completely obvious to you. The absolute truth is that every single child is born with this incredible capability, and staggering studies show that 98% of children actually test at a verified creative genius level when they are very young, not because some children are naturally gifted and others are cursed, but simply because the whole human brain is beautifully, perfectly synchronized from the moment of birth. But then the harsh, demanding world intervenes, the rigid school systems, the crushing stress of performance-based culture, and the frantic, chronic pace of modern life begin a slow, devastating process of subtly disconnecting those two hemispheres from each other, forcing them to operate independently and inefficiently. And tragically, by the time we reach adulthood, less than 1 in 1,000 people still carry the incredible level of whole brain activation they were originally born with, leaving the vast majority operating on what effectively amounts to exactly half of the magnificent instrument they were given by God, entirely not because of age, but because of environmental suppression. Steve Jobs designing the revolutionary iPhone in a flow state his awestruck colleagues described as effortless brilliance. Nikola Tesla mentally solving impossibly complex engineering problems in a state that defied conventional scientific explanation, and Taylor Swift captivating 80,000 people with a magnetic presence that is not merely rehearsed but deeply channeled. All of these are highly documented, undeniable examples of whole brain activation in action. This is the exact, optimal state where both hemispheres are working in absolute, full synchronization. A state that Dr. Barron and his brilliant colleagues refer to as the genius switch. Because when this biological switch is finally flipped back active, the staggering quality of thought, deep insight, and rapid creativity that it naturally produces looks exactly like magic or pure genius to anyone observing from the outside. The harsh wilderness you walked through did not permanently take your brilliant mind from you. It only rigorously tested your spirit, but the stressful world around you, beginning all the way back in your childhood, absolutely did begin a subtle process of neurological suppression that has absolutely nothing to do with your innate intelligence, your daily discipline, your deep faith, or your inherent worth as a human being. What was so unfairly taken from you was absolutely not earned by the systems that took it. And the glorious truth of this Wednesday is that what can be completely returned and restored to you today is not at all contingent on you doing enough exhausting work to finally deserve its miraculous return. Consider the powerful story of a woman raised in the concrete grid of Manhattan who genuinely, deeply believed her entire family lived under an unbreakable, multi-generational curse of terrible luck, a woman who painfully watched her loyal father give 22 exhausting years to a company that callously shut its doors the very week after he finally received a hard-earned promotion. She desperately tried every available spiritual practice, self-help book, and manifestation technique, she could find and found absolutely nothing that truly broke through the heavy ceiling over her life until she began using a highly specific 8-minute auditory sequence daily for just 2 weeks. Suddenly, an explosive insight at work completely solved a massive, complex problem her entire team had carried like a weight for over a year, followed rapidly by a deeply honest, breakthrough conversation that beautifully opened up a marriage that had been completely closed off and suffocating for a decade. Then came the unexpected, life-changing call from a massive company she had contacted months ago and completely forgotten about, leading her to finally say in one breathless, tear-filled sentence, "The family curse is totally gone." Realizing that what she had mistakenly called a spiritual curse was actually just the severe generational suppression of whole brain activation in a family that had carried dormant genius for decades. She was incredibly brave enough to be the very first person in her entire bloodline to properly name the true issue and decisively step completely out of it. And you must understand that what she walked into was not a brand new gift suddenly given to her out of nowhere. It was a rightful inheritance that was finally restored, and that exact same profound restoration is precisely what is available to you on this powerful Rashit Wednesday. Dr. Daniel Barron, the brilliant neurologist working tirelessly in New York City, spent 20 dedicated years in the laboratory, carefully turning what Dr. Sperry had previously proved was theoretically possible into something incredibly practical, accessible, and undeniable that any everyday person can easily access in just 8 minutes a day. It is absolutely not a highly complicated, exhausting protocol that requires hours of your time, nor is it a massively expensive, elite machine reserved only for billionaires. It is a highly targeted, scientifically engineered auditory sequence delivered simply through everyday headphones that gently but powerfully reintroduces the exact neural synchronization signal that your left and right hemispheres instantly recognize and remember from your childhood. His astounded colleagues appropriately called it the genius switch, and I need you to know it is not just another cheap brainwave product. It is not a generic meditation app that tells you to breathe deeply, and it is certainly not a $7,000 neurofeedback machine that requires you to schedule endless, expensive clinic visits to see any results. It is simply 8 potent minutes of highly targeted, meticulously engineered audio, strictly built on the undeniable Nobel Prize-winning discoveries of Dr. Roger Sperry, something you simply listen to just once a day with your headphones on and your eyes closed, allowing the brilliant neural synchronization to do all the heavy lifting while you simply rest and easily receive it. If you have desperately tried various brainwave tracks, binaural beats, or frequencies before, and frustratingly found that absolutely nothing in your life or mind actually changed, I want to address that completely directly right now, because that is the valid, understandable question of someone who is being brutally honest about their past disappointments and is tired of false hope. What the vast majority of those failed, surface-level approaches have in common is that they weakly attempt to address basic brain waves only, and Dr. Barron is incredibly, aggressively specific about this crucial distinction. Most serious modern scientists no longer exclusively study basic brain waves as the primary mechanism for real cognitive breakthrough because manipulating brain waves is fundamentally incomplete and deeply flawed. They merely address one tiny, isolated variable of the brain's massive complexity and tragically leave the much larger, more important instrument entirely untouched and unchanged, which is exactly why you never felt the breakthrough you were promised. What true, authentic whole brain activation targets is absolutely not a superficial brain wave. It is the deep, fundamental, structural hemisphere synchronization, the absolute reestablishment of the brilliant, harmonious connection that allows your entire mind to function as the spectacular, unstoppable masterpiece the Creator always intended it to be, starting right now, on this magnificent Wednesday.